Okay, so let's restart. And Murat, I think you had a few questions, and you wanted me to go over like what's an S control. All right, so the first one is what's an S control? Well, an S control is it's not something we cover in this class, but it's a bit of JavaScript in a web page that can execute some logic to do web services calls. It was the former, it used to be the way that we would do custom pages within Salesforce, but it was really deprecated with Visualforce pages. And once Visualforce pages came along, that's now the mechanism for creating custom pages, because there we can do server-side processing as opposed to S controls, which was client-side processing, and also heavily dependent upon our customers writing JavaScript. So it's something that in the beginning of next year, we're actually going to churn off customers' abilities to create new S controls, and really going forward, Visualforce pages where our development resources are going to be placed. So, but that's what an S control is. So I think you're asking about, so what's an activity? So there are tasks and there are events. Those are the two types of activities. A task is associated with a record. You might say that somebody is required to do something associated with that record, and you could assign that person a task. So you might say that you need to you need to contact the hiring manager and file the paperwork for this position. So that might be a task that you assign to someone. And what would happen is that when a user went to their Home tab, they could either go to their Home tab or they could go to that particular record. But here they could see all the tasks assigned to them. And then the events is just, it's within Salesforce, there's a calendaring application. And events, the classic example would be, Salesforce automation stuff. Like I'm going to meet with a customer. I would create an event in Salesforce, which would be, a calendaring event. And you can do things like send. It's much like an Outlook event or, a meeting type request type thing where it's something occurring in the future that somebody's going to meet with someone else, and we can track it via Salesforce. Okay.
Whenever object is created within this object, then some event will be triggered, and or some task will be created. Is that right?
Yeah. So think about it this way: by clicking on this checkbox. So let's say we're saying allow activities. What we're doing here is we're saying, all right, I want to define a relationship between our tasks and whatever this current custom object is, so that I can create tasks or events associated with this object type. Okay, so there's some stuff going on in the background with respect to the relations. Okay, and when we're saying allow reporting or allow reports, what it's going to do is it's going to create some report types, and a report type is the necessary ingredient for generating a report. Think of it as the template for the report that's being created down the road, so that when a user wants to, one of your power users or your admins down the road wants to report on all the open positions, they would have a standard report type available which they could utilize. And then field history tracking, did I cover all the, okay. And field history tracking, we'll talk about that one later actually. We'll get into that one, okay? So, all right, so I created the demo object, all right? And I just want to talk about standard fields and custom fields really quickly. So there are standard fields, and there are 6 standard fields. There's actually a few more, but there's 6 primary standard fields that exist on every custom object that you create. So one of them is the name field, and that was that text or auto number. Another is the ID. So the ID is that primary key that we use to uniquely identify records. Even though auto number generates a unique value, like I said, that is not the primary key for identifying a particular record. There's also fields like created by, last modified by. Created by is who's the user that created this record. Last modified, who's the last user to edit this record. Associated with those is a created date and a last modified date. So those are two other standard fields. And then there's the owner field. That's the assigned, who is the assigned owner for an object. When we talk about security, we'll talk about ownership and what that means. But all of these are examples of standard fields associated with our custom objects. Okay? In other words, default fields that are automatically created. Okay? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new custom field. All right? So here's the definition of my custom object. If I scroll down here to New Custom Fields and I click on the New button, what I can do is I can define a new custom field and select the data type of that custom field. We'll come back to things like formula, lookup, and master detail relationships in a bit. But what I'd like to focus on is all of these different field types that would actually be raw data. Okay? There's a number of these associated with classic data types, so numbers, date timestamps, and then different lengths of text. In addition, we also have the option for pick lists. There are pick lists and multi-select pick lists. What I'll do is I'll select text here. And what that means is that here I'm creating a field in which I can enter in any sort of text field or text data. Now in this case, I'll call this one demo field. A text has a length. The length is the number of characters that the user can enter into this field. So if I enter in 20 here, we can allow up to 20 characters in this particular field. This custom field, there's a description and a help text. The description is for other administrators and developers, the people who use the setup menu, to be able to see what this does. Help text is intended for end users. So here is some bubble help. Okay? All right. And what's going to happen is it's going to display one of the blue eyes for doing bubble help. Okay?
If you enter something, there will be blue eyes. If you don't enter something, there will be no blue eyes, right? You don't separately configure it. Exactly.
So there's not an enable disable. It's just the presence of something to display turns that on. In the case of a text or a field of type text, here's where some of those options are. Required, do not allow null values for this field. Unique, if there's already an existing value within the database, do not allow us to save that. And then external ID. Now the thing about external ID is that by default it is not unique. So uniqueness and external ID are two separate things. Okay? But the external ID is a field that we index on for the purpose of identifying whether or not a record already exists within the database. Okay? So you can turn on some or all of those. And then default value, if we don't get a value for this, what's the default that we want to use? Now this can also be, we can also use what are called formula functions. We'll come back to those later when we get into our business logic stuff later on this afternoon, but you can do some more tricky stuff in this case. Okay? All right. So I'm going to click on the next button. Now, what's going to happen is that you're going to be prompted for, first of all, some security settings. What I'd like you to do is, for right now, just click Next tomorrow we'll get into security and what field level security is. I know it's a little bit frustrating right now, but just click next, and like I said, we'll definitely cover this, okay? And then it's going to prompt you for, do you want to add this to the page layouts? Later on in a couple of hours, we'll talk about page layouts and how you can display fields on a page layout. But once again, just click on Save and just accept the default values here, okay? But what I've done now is I've now created a custom field associated with my, my custom object. Now it says that this is called demo field. The way I would actually refer to this from a programmatic standpoint, whether in my functions or if I were to write some Apex code or in a visual force page, would be to use the API name, which is the demo underscore field double underscore C, okay? So there's a difference between the label and the API name. The label is what the user will see. The API name is what you will use to refer to it programmatically, either within your functions or in your code or your markup. Okay.
Well, we also have a field name, so.
What's that? Well, the field name is simply the field. Don't worry about the field name. Yeah.
API name is automatically created, or should we?
Well, the field name was what it is something that we could have edited when we created it. So you might have wanted to come in here and change this to something else, you know, and then we would have done the double underscore C on the end of this. So we take whatever the field name is and then append the double underscore C onto it. Yes, it's automatically done. So
if we put a field name with a underscore, double underscore C right here, what would happen to the API name?
Let me test that out. So what if we did do a double underscore C? It does not allow it. So yeah, it doesn't allow it. So yeah, it's controlled by the database. So all right. So let me show you some different field types. So if we create, let me jump back to my demo object. So I can create a pick list. In the case of a pick list, here we go. Now, a pick list, you identify, so once again, you're going to give it the label, and notice it will auto-populate, so demo pick list, okay. Notice it's going to once again auto-populate the field name. Now, there's some different options available with the pick list. Now, first of all, with a pick list, you need to identify what are the fields that are going to be the allowable values. In other words, what is the user going to be able to select from the drop-down list? So, you know, here you do choice 1, choice 2. What you do not do is do not place these on the same line or comma delimit them or semicolon delimit them. Always place a unique value on a separate line. Okay. So, item 3, whatever it may be. There's a couple of options here. Sort values alphabetically. Not in the order entered, and then use first value as the default value. Otherwise, there's a none option. So this, you can have a pick list in which it's empty, So, and then once again, our description and our help task. So. Question? Yes.
Probably know the answer. So if I want to make the second field the default value, you can't.
Make the second field, oh, use the first, no you can't, yeah. So the question is, can the second value be the default value? And no. Although you could, you could probably do some, well, I'm trying to think of something you could do with Apex or formula, not formula field, but a validation rule. You might be able to do something with a validation rule. to check to see if it's, yeah. Well, that wouldn't really, yeah. You might be able to do something with a visual force page and do something different than what's here, but probably be a little bit of effort to do that. So.
Controlling independent is controlled elsewhere?
Yes, yeah. So let me create, and I'm going to go through the security options. Okay. And then I can create another pick list. Okay. And then choice 4, choice 5. And so I'm just going to create some default data. Okay. All right. Now, notice that there's the availability of field dependencies. Okay. So what I can do is here, I can create the dependencies between my pick lists. So here I have the controlling field, and then here I can also identify my dependent field. So I can go like this, where I select OK. Now in my case, unfortunately, I created really lame field values. But if the user selected choice 1, then they would only have choice 5 available. If they selected choice, you can do like with the shift key, let me see, the control key. So you can do include values. And basically what you do is you highlight what you want to be the available choices if the user selects, in this case, choice 1 in the controlling field. And then by highlighting these and then clicking on the Save button, I'm identifying what will be available in the second pick list in terms of available options. Okay? Does that, did I?
Okay, so if they choose item 3, then on pick list 2, they won't see anything.
Exactly. So in that case, yeah, if they chose item 3, they will not see, it will essentially be inactive. Yeah.
So if it's a required field, you're going to get into a inconsistency, right?
For a pick, yeah. Let me see. Pick lists cannot be set to be required. Now you can create a validation rule. We'll talk about validation rules later, but you could create something to check to see that it's not null. So, but from an object level, you can't set requiredness. So, yeah. So, yes.
This is like if you have like 4 different options for your pick list, they're fixed. Is it possible to make it like dynamic so it can read the possible values from a table or something? Because it may change.
Yeah. Well, okay, so the question is, can you have, if you're creating a pick list, can you have dynamic values that are available? Well, the answer is no if you're talking about just a pick list. Now, what you would want to do is instead of, if you want dynamic available values, instead of creating a pick list, create a related list of related objects, and then the records in that related object would be the allowable values for that situation. Yes and no. You just implement it differently by using object relationships. So, okay. There is also the ability to control what the available items are using record types. We'll talk about that later on, tomorrow specifically. So in addition to dependent pick lists, there's also something called record types where we can limit the available values in a pick list. So there are other tools that customize the pick list experience. Okay, let's talk about relationships. Object relationships. All right, in general, there are a couple of ways that you can look at relationships. One is that it's parent to child. So the child object actually defines the lookup to the parent. But a parent, while a parent can have many children, a child can only have one parent. Okay? So within Salesforce, one of the things that you'll see is when you're defining relationships between two objects, the relationship itself will be defined on the child. You will reference a related object type using a field, and that child can only have one parent, but the parent might be referred to by many children. Therefore, the parent might have many related children associated with it. So in this case, here we have a single user record, but there are 3 related position records. Okay? So in this case, we'll actually do something where we have a hiring manager, and there might be a single hiring manager who has 3 positions for which that person is the hiring manager for those 3 positions. So we define that relationship between the position and the user table using a field called hiring manager, which defines that relationship. Okay. All right. There are 2 sort of actual types, and by actual I mean when you go into the tool, you're going to see lookup as an option and master detail as an option. So these are 2 different types of one-to-many relationships that you can identify. Now there's 2, it says special types. Now these are simply implementation, ways to implement the other 2. So we'll talk about these in a second, but there's no actual option for creating a self relationship. There's no option for creating a many-to-many, but we'll show you how you would do that using lookups and master details. Okay? All right, so what's the difference between a lookup relationship and a master detail relationship? Well, like I said, there are 2 main types of relationships, lookup relationship and a master detail. Now, in general, a lookup relationship is loosely coupled with the other record. A master detail relationship is tightly coupled with the other record. So what's the difference between loosely coupled and tightly coupled? Well, loosely coupled means that the child may or may not have a related parent. In other words, the parent is optional on the child. Okay? In addition, there's separate record level access defined for the parent and the child. So independent access control to both of these different records. Okay? And then finally, no cascading delete. Because the relationship is optional, deleting the parent does not delete all related children. Okay? Now the flip side to this is the master detail relationship. In a master detail relationship, it is tightly coupled. If a child is referring to a specific parent and a user goes in and deletes that parent record, all associated child records will also be deleted. So there's a cascading delete.
Are they warned? Are they warned about that if they try?
Let's see. Let me, so here's an example of a master detail relationship. As a review does a master detail lookup to, or master detail relationship to a job application. So if I delete this, it's are you sure is the default, and that's it. So there's not a you are deleting, yeah. So. All right. That being said, we keep records around for 30 days, so they are recoverable. There is a recycle bin. If someone does something where they, you can backtrack to a certain degree.
30 or 45 days?
Excuse me?
30 days or 45 days?
30.
In the beginning, there was another thing about
45? Yeah, if you, in the definition of the object, if you delete the field, then it's gone for 45 days. But that's the definition of the object. Here we're talking about a specific record. Okay. Yeah, so the on the child, it always has to reference a parent. So it's a required field in a master detail relationship. That means that when we delete the parent, it cascade deletes the children. And then finally, the child inherits access according to the parent. So it's the parent that defines the access control for the child. Okay? In other words, if I have access to the parent, I now have access to the child. There's also, in the case of the number of lookup relationships, a child can have 25 lookup relationships, but in terms of a master detail, it can only have 2 master detail relationships. Okay? You might be wondering, if I have a child record that has 2 relationships with master detail to 2 different objects. Remember I said that access control, record level access control, is inherited from the parent. Well, which one does it inherit it from? Whichever one you define first. So the first primary one defined is the one that determines access to the child. Okay? So. All right, so here's just a little bit of a comparison. We talked about those things. The can be multiple layers deep is referring to our reporting in terms of the way that you can drill down on the reporting. And then, required versus optional. So for the most part, they look the same. Except for the big difference is that because the master detail is required, it'll have that red indicator indicating this is a required field. So. Yes, question?
Can a child has a mixed relation? Can it be can it has at the same time a master relationship and a lookup relationship?
Oh yeah. So so if I have a child record, and it has a master detail relationship up to some other object, it can have a lookup relationship with some other. Yeah, definitely. So.
About those up to 2 allowed per object, does it mean that an object cannot have more than 2 kinds of children in master detail relationships? There's only 2 different children objects we can.
Oh no! Now, okay? So the question is, from the master, how many children can it have?
Yeah, how many children?
Yeah.
Master detail relationships it can have.
Yeah, I don't know that is a much higher number. I'm not sure what the maximum number of related lists that you can have is, but that's a much higher number. So you can have a single object being the parent in many relationships. The limit is really placed on the child, the number of relationships that the child can define to the parent, not the number of related lists that a parent can have. In other words, not the number of child relationships.
This 2 is in the child part, so child.
This applies to so the limitations placed on the child in terms of the number of parents or number of parent relationships, this is not being applied to the parent in terms of the number of child relationships.
So it's a many-to-many join we are talking about now.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Many-to-many joins we are talking about now, many-to-many relationships, because a child cannot have more than 1 parent. You said in the beginning, now we are talking about many-to-many relationships.
So
if we say that up to 2 allowed per object, so a child can have 1 or 2 parents.
Yeah.
If it has 2 parents, that's a many-to-many relationship, right?
Yes. We'll talk about many-to-many in a second. So so you can have a child can do lookups or master detail relationships to different object types, and you can create a many-to-many relationship ultimately using that technique. Yeah. All right. So in terms of what you'll see, we'll talk about many-to-many relationships in a bit, but this is really referring to the report types that you'll see by default when you create these relationships. So one of the things that you'll see, so I just showed you job application and then review, right? And so I deleted the job application, and review had a master detail relationship with job application. One of the things that we do is we automatically create a standard report type that would be called job applications with reviews. Okay? So we don't just create reports based on a single current object type, but we create standard report types where it's parent with children. Okay? So in fact, not only do we take parent with children, but parent with grandchildren. So you'll see many standard report types. Now this all being said, you can create custom report types where you have more flexibility over what the parent is and the related children and grandchildren, and you can actually go down, I believe, 4 levels. So great-great-grandchildren, child, grandchild, yeah. You can go down 4 levels. So.
There was a field checkbox called allow reports, while we have created objects.
Yeah.
If an object is going to be in a report in any way, as a child or as a parent or anyway,
yes.
It has to
check
have
that
the
box.
Checks.
Yeah.
So even if we have it checked in the parent, we have to also check it in the child.
Oh, yeah, you're not gonna, so you're saying hypothetically, if we checked it in the parent but not the child, would we see it? No, because we can't report on the child. Yeah, so we're not going to see, for instance, job applications with reviews or whatever it may be. Yeah. Make sure it's checked on both. Yeah. All right. All right, in the lab exercise, you're going to create a lookup relationship. But let me show you the tool and kind of walk you through what you're going to do, and then we'll allow you to work on this. So in the tool, the way that we define relationships is, like I said, from the child up to the parent. Okay? And we do it by creating a field. So if I go back to my demo object that I created, here it is, demo object. Now, if I wanted to relate my demo object with another object where the other object was the parent, what I'd do is I'd create a new custom field, and I could identify whether this is a lookup relationship or a master detail relationship. Okay? So I'm going to select lookup relationship and click on next. And I'm identifying the object type that I want to relate this child to. So this is the parent. So here, let's say I want to, I'm going to associate it with, let's say, candidate. All right. So this is the parent object. Now it prompts me for a field label. In other words, what label do I want to use on the child to refer to the parent? Okay. Now, often you'll just use the name of the object, but often you won't. So an example would be, remember when we had the position lookup to the user? We didn't create a field called user. We wanted to create a field called hiring manager. So in that case, I would give it a meaningful name that would be the field name, as opposed to whatever just the default name of the object is. So, here I could take the default, or you could come up with something more meaningful. Okay? All right, I'm going to click on Next. Once again, we get the same field level security options. If we were doing a master detail, this wouldn't be, if it's required, it can't be read-only. And then ultimately adding it to a page layout, we'll talk about that in a bit. But now we've defined the relationship. Now there's actually a final option, which is from the parent, how do you want me to label the related list of the children? Okay, so previously on that last, we were defining, back here, we were saying what's the label on the child? It's one more back, but anyways. Here, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, on the parent, how do we want to refer to our related list label? Okay, so we can call this demo objects or whatever. All right? Okay. So I'm going to click on Save, and now I have a new field, which is my lookup relationship. And then notice it has the, this is the field label, but this is the object type that it's doing the lookup to. Okay? So here's my related list of demo objects. Okay? So, all right. All right, so let's jump into this. Let's do this. Let's do exercise 2-3 and then 2-5. In 2-3 and 2-5, you're going to be creating some relationships. You're going to be creating a few lookup relationships between job applications and positions, position and user, and then some master detail relationships between interviewer and position and job application review. Okay? So what we're going to talk about now is we're going to talk about self relationships and then also many-to-many relationships. So two sort of, not really types, but implementations of other types of relationships. So all a self relationship is that it's simply an object that has a lookup to itself, to its own object type. So you might have situations where if you think about accounts, you know, where it's you have a corporation which is a subsidiary in another corporation. You have situations where a case maybe references another case. You have situations where if you have a solution that references other solutions. So it's entirely possible to have related or a lookup to an object of the same type. All right, many-to-many, this is where it gets a little bit more complex. So one of the things that you can do is you can create a many-to-many relationship. The way you do that is you create two separate one-to-many relationships, and what we do is we create what's called a junction object, which establishes the many-to-many relationship between the outer objects. Here's an example. So in the bottom example, we're able to create what is essentially a many-to-many relationship between the positions and the candidates by utilizing the job application as the junction object in the middle. Okay? So in this case here, if we take a look, the senior developer position has two job applications, and then it looks like Ethan and Bonnie have essentially applied to that position. So a particular candidate can apply to many positions. A particular position might have many candidates applying to that job. Okay? What we're going to do in order to make this happen is on the job application, we would create a combination of lookup and master detail relationships from the job application up to the candidate and then also up to the position. Okay? All right. So we need that junction object. It says here a junction object is it's a custom object with two master detail relationships. Well, that's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. In fact, if you take a look at the previous screen, in our ERD, you might notice that the relationship from the job application up to the candidate in the position, those are both lookup relationships. So I guess if it's a true or junction object, it would be master details, but in our case, we're actually doing lookup relationships, but it's still a junction object. Now, the value in creating a junction object that does two master details is that any deletion of the outer record deletes all associated junction records, okay? So in that case, I say it's a true junction object because its only purpose, its only existence is if it is bound to each of these, okay? So jumping back to here once again, you know, if I deleted the senior developer position, that would have a cascading delete on Ethan's job application and Bonnie's job application to those, okay? So keep that in mind. All right. Often you'll use the auto number data type for the name field to auto populate that number to fill something out there. Taking a look at our ERD, like I said, notice that position or job application has that lookup to position, but it also has the lookup to candidate, but there's a many-to-many relationship there. There's also, notice the position programming language, so in the lower left-hand corner, there's a junction object called position programming language, which does a lookup to both position and programming language. Now in this case, the sole purpose of the position programming language is to enable that link, that many-to-many link, between a position and the programming languages that are required in order to fulfill that requirements for that position, okay? So once again, that sort of cascading delete exists. And then we, you know, in our case, we're using that naming convention where we're just using the names of the two objects that it's ultimately, you know, a junction for. That being said, if you take a look on to the right of that where there's the job posting and the job posting site, in this case, this one is also a junction object, but then notice also that you know, a job posting in of itself has some meaning, and so instead of calling it a position job posting site, we just called it a job posting. So, all right, but both of those are doing master to details. Another thing before we jump into the exercise, another thing I want to point out is that, well, why did we create a lookup relationship between a job application position and job application and candidate? And the reason is that when you're creating master detail relationships, there's a limitation or a requirement associated with those. And that requirement is that an object that is a detail in a master detail relationship cannot also be a master, and vice versa, obviously, okay? So any object that is either a detail or a master cannot also be the other. So because we have a master detail relationship from the review up to the job application could not have a master detail relationship up to candidate or position, because then it would then be both a master and a detail in two different relationships, and that's not allowed. Okay?
So the way you have it set up, though, if you did in fact delete the position, you wouldn't actually lose your job application.
True. Yeah. Yep. So you could sort of you could do some stuff like I've mentioned validation rules, but you can do some stuff to make it required. So there are kind of tricks to sort of replicate to a certain degree that master detail relationship in a lookup. So you can never fully replicate it or really come close, but there's some stuff that you can do to kind of mimic the behavior. So.
What happens when you say it's not allowed? What happens when you try to do it? When you create a field for master detail?
So I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
When you, for example, have an object
Uh-huh.
that is a child in a master detail
Yeah.
relationship,
Okay.
and you create in another object, you create a relationship to this as a master.
Uh-huh.
What happens then? Because it's a child, you said it's not allowed to be master again.
Yeah.
So it doesn't allow you to create it? It gives an error message? Or?
Yeah, it's not going to allow you to do that. So the question is, you know, what happens when you do attempt to do this? It's not going to allow you to do that. So if, let me just show you in the tool. So once I go out here and in my case, so the job application, right? So if from the job application I attempt to create a new master detail, notice that it does not allow me to create a master detail relationship as a child because I'm already, or in this case, the job application is already a master. So it does, I mean, it has the logic to basically.
So what do you do now when you want to do some kind of a pyramid organization? What a master and its childs, and those childs are masters of other childs, like a pyramid. But what are you going to do?
Well, you can't. So the question is, if you wanted to create sort of a pyramid relationship in which you had many details which were also masters, or sort of a using the master detail from parent to child to grandchild. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you can't. Like I said, you have to pick where you're going to apply this, and then ultimately use lookup relationships for the other relationships.
So for lookups, it's allowed, but for master details.
Yes. So this rule only applies to lookups. I'm sorry, master detail. So the question is, can we do sort of a pyramid type of thing, or have this sort of multi-generational relationships? And the answer is yes. You just need to use lookups. So it's only master detail that has that limitation on dual purpose. Lookups, a record, or I'm sorry, an object can be a child in a lookup relationship and a parent in a lookup relationship. So, yes?
So with the master relationship, the further you can go is 2 levels?
So the question is, what's the maximum number of levels that you can go up? Well, it's just really 1. I mean, in the case of, if a let's use the example here. So let's jump back to the ERD and take a look at that. So it's really only 1 level in the sense that our review has the master detail relationship up to the job application. The master detail must stop at that point. From that point on, it must then do a lookup to whatever it may be. And then then down the road, you could restart that if you wanted to do another master detail relationship. But that rule of a master cannot also be a detail is what's enforced. So, yeah.
Is that
Yes.
limitation by design, or is it something that Salesforce is trying to overcome?
So the question is it sort of something we've designed, or is it
Is there a good programming practice or design practice that you've done that's done like that? Or?
I'm not sure why it is the way it is. I think that, so the question is, did we do this on purpose, or is this a limitation? I don't know. I think that there's the multi-tenant architecture of Salesforce and the optimizations that they are able to make on the database, and especially with things like cascading deletes and so on, and inherited access. Certain situations it makes sense to do things one way, but then it doesn't make sense because of performance, for instance. It's highly optimized, and so I'm not sure if this is something that there's an actual, well, it doesn't make sense for this reason, which there are some situations where you think, oh, why doesn't it do this? And then they're like, well, wait a minute, think about it, that doesn't make sense. Yeah, I'm not sure if this is sort of like a limitation that maybe someday they would come up with a new release that would sort of not fix it, but make it be able to do that. But currently, the best answer I can give you is it's the way it is. So it is what it is.
So could you say that maybe a junction record is like a union? You use SQL language?
Yeah, I'm not much of a database programmer myself. I'm more of a Java background, so I hesitate to commit to database terms, but you're like the 3rd person that said that. So what I'd like you to do is what we're going to do is we're going to work on a lab exercise, and we're going to be creating that job posting object with the master detail lookups or relationships to the job posting site and the position. Okay, so that'll be exercise 2-5. So we'll spend some time working on that, and then we'll continue after that working on the next topic. All right, Chris, you want to take question number 1?
Can I choose number 4?
Number 4.
No,
That's the tough
I'll
one.
do one. So a custom object is, I think, a database-like concept, similar to a table.
Yep.
That operates within the force.com
Yeah.
framework.
Yeah. Okay. So similar to a table. Yeah. Very good. So Anu, list examples of custom field types. What are some of the different types of fields?
Like a pick list.
Pick list.
Text.
Text.
Date, time, date.
Very good. All right, that's enough.
Multi-pick There's too many.
Yeah, no. That's great. Yeah, so there's about 15, 20, something like that. But yeah, pick lists, text, datetime, numeric ones. So, all right, true or false? If a field is set to universally required, which is not even an option available, but if it's set to required, what's that?
Sounds like it's false.
I know, it kind of gives it away. So if a field is set to universally required, users will be required to populate it when loading data through the API. So Chris?
Yeah, I'm gonna guess.
Yeah. So so first off, there is no checkbox for universally required. There is a checkbox for required, and that makes it universally required. So regardless of the mechanism that you're using to get data into the database, anytime you're inserting a new record, it's going to need a value there. Okay? So, or for that matter, if you update it and you explicitly set that value to false, or I'm sorry, not false, but null, then it's going to complain.
If you had a default value in there though, and you used loaded it through the API, would it just then put in your default value?
Oh, well, regardless, let's see here. So if we went out and so let's see, here's our demo object and our demo field. And if we said always require a value, and then let's see here, hello. And then, the trick is testing this out. I think what's going to happen is it's going to use the it's going to populate it with hello. Let me test that one out during the break. I think it's going to pop. It might not, but let me check to see. So that's my assumption, but I will test that during the next break. All right, question number 4. So, Raj, I'll give you the option. You can make Leah do this question, since she.
How about I give the ones I know and then Leah can do the rest?
That's what I'm giving you the option. So.
I'll be your lifeline.
You got a lifeline sitting to your right. So, you want to do this one or?
Yeah.
Okay, go for it.
Lookup relationships.
Yes.
Master detail relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Self relationships.
Yep.
Can't think of junction tables.
Well, junction, but what do we call that? What type of relation?
Many to many.
Many to many, exactly. So
Think of M&Ms.
many to many. So what the lookup? If you briefly described the difference between a lookup and a master detail, how would you do that?
With a master detail, the detail only exists with a master present.
Yes.
There's cascade deletes on master detail
Very good.
records.
Very good.
the permissions.
Very good. So
Okay.
there's three primary. So when thinking about our master detail relationships, there's three primary things. There's a lot of other considerations, but the access control, so record level access, is determined by the parent. So there's that relationship. It's mandatory on the child that it reference a parent. Therefore, it's required. And then the third one is the cascade delete. So if you delete the parent, it will then cascade delete the child. Yeah. Our lookup is going to be the flip side of that. It's going to be loosely coupled, and therefore it's not going to have those features, if you will. And then the self relationship is just, all it is a lookup to its own object type. And then many to many is where we actually create a junction object in the middle, and it does the lookup to the two objects that are ultimately being bound in that many to many way. Okay?
For more information on Salesforce.com training and certification, please visit www.salesforce.com/training.